Okay, could you let me know if you can see my screen now? Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So, good morning, good evening to all. My name is Artur Palac. I work as a project officer for the International Ocean Carbon Coordination Project, which is also the biogeochemistry panel of experts of the Global Ocean Observing System, GOOS. So I would like to introduce you here in this presentation to the idea of developing marine plastics debris as a new type of essential ocean variable. So during this presentation, I'll just briefly explain the concept of what an EOV is and as a means of implementing the framework for ocean observing, which is another global observing framework. Then Sanaya will also comment on the relevance of this approach to the CBD and SDG indicator framework. And during the second part of the session on Wednesday, we will both go into more details on how GOOS in partnership with other organizations could support global coordination of marine observations. So GOOS, for those of you who don't know, is a program executed by the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission, IOC of UNESCO. It's also co-sponsored by the World Meteorological Organization, UN Environment Program, and the International Council for Science. Its success really relies on the coordinated contributions of several people and organizations worldwide. And in our 2030 GOOS strategy, which was launched just year, we envision a fully integrated 2030 ocean observing system, providing the critical ocean information needed to address climate change, generate forecasts, protect ocean health, and support sustainable growth with new partnerships and worldwide participation. So to meet this objective, this vision is based on 11 strategic objectives put forward by GOOS, and the 10th one actually states to extend systematic observations to understand human impacts on the ocean. And supporting a harmonized and standardized marine litter pollution monitoring is one of the priorities under this objective. To meet this objective, GOOS is committed to co-designing relevant actions with nations, partners, and our sponsors, such as UNEP. What I would like to convey in this presentation is that GOOS wants to offer the capacity and resources to support a collaborative effort to implement some of the very ambitious visions for an integrated marine debris observing system, INDOS, and also the global platform for marine litter monitoring and informing action that Gillian just talked about as well. So these two visions were published in recent community white papers, and they were also briefly introduced to you by René during our Friday session. And I want to say that in GOOS, we would like to recommend that this support takes place for establishing marine plastics debris as this new type of essential ocean variable. What is our methodology in GOOS? We follow the framework for ocean observing, which was produced as a direct recommendation from the Ocean OBS 09 conference. The framework, also called the FOO, was conceived to guide the ocean observing community as a whole to establish an integrated and sustained global ocean observing system. It's a system that traditionally includes ocean physics, biogeochemistry, ocean biology, and ecosystems. Similar to the SDG framework, the FOO addresses the variables to be measured, the approach to measuring them, how their data and products will be managed and made widely available for assessments and other applications, ranging from climate to operational services to ocean health. Through its structures and partnerships, GOOS has acquired the capacity to coordinate global ocean observations, mostly in the open ocean, across the entire value chain described by the FOO and also visible on this diagram. So this process starts with the setting requirements for observations, that is saying which parameters should be measured and on what spatial temporal scale, resolution, and what acceptable uncertainty for a given application. And these requirements are then set as implementation targets for global coordination of in situ and satellite observing platforms and networks. Then to ultimately produce the data and information products which meet the needs of the end users. Central to the FOO approach is the concept of readiness, which considers whether there's agreed methodology and best practices to measuring the given variable, whether the observations meet the quality required, and whether they are internationally coordinated. Efforts to increase the system readiness level from concept to mature are organized around the essential ocean variables, which include those ocean measurements which impact and feasibility are high enough to justify their long-term monitoring investment on a global scale. While current EOVs, like I mentioned, are specific to physics, biogeochemistry, and biology, GOOS has for a long time recognized that this concept should be expanded onto measurable indicators of human impact, such as marine pollution. And also following the recommendations from the community, most recently expressed during the Ocean Ops 19 conference, we have committed our capacity and resources to support the establishing of marine plastic pollution as a new type of EOV. So first, to go into the three pillars of the FOO regarding requirements. EOV requirements for what to measure and how should be set independent of the measuring platform and specified in terms of required coverage, resolution, measurement, and uncertainty. These should reflect the needs of policy, for example, the World Meteorological Organization climate indicators, but at the same time, for example, SDG indicators. And so finally, they become also an objective reference for whoever evaluates the performance of the observing system. As in the case of SDG indicators, this process is very challenging, as you can imagine. Let me briefly use an example of the existing and mature inorganic carbon EOV and the pH parameter in particular. Here, a measurement of average marine acidity, pH, constitutes indicator 14.3.1, needed to inform target 14.3 on minimizing impacts of ocean acidification. So these measurements are going to be performed mostly in the coastal waters around the globe using lower accuracy sensors that are more affordable for a majority of the developing countries in the global coastal ocean. However, pH is also a key climate indicator, which needs to be measured in the open ocean basins at a much higher accuracy level, but at the same time, at a lower requirement for resolution and frequency of sampling. Similar considerations, of course, need to be taken when setting requirements for oxygen, nutrients, chlorophyll concentration, and other parameters that are used as water quality indicators on one hand, and climate indicators on the other hand. It's interesting to note that there are already first examples of setting such requirements for marine litter, at least from remote sensing, and you can look at the paper by Victor Martinez Vicente et al. For details on that. And in either case, setting these requirements is always going to be a broad and iterative stakeholder consultation process. Realizing the requirements is then down to the different components of the observing system, which are brought together in GOOS under the Observations Coordination Group. Most EOVs are being monitored on a myriad of platforms. Some of them you can see through the list of coordinating networks on this slide here, taken from a recent Ocean Observing System report card. Knowing what is being measured and where at any given point in time is essential to proper coordination of observations. And a technical support for that is provided in GOOS by the In Situ Observations Program Support Center, Ocean Ops, formerly called JCOM Ops. In GOOS, we are gradually expanding from platform-based to EOV-based coordination of these networks. This is particularly important when monitoring the status of observations also in the coastal domain, where these observations are going to be a lot more fragmented. So I believe that for marine litter monitoring, which needs to be carried out on many platforms in situ and remotely, there will be a similar, if not greater challenge. So along with the need to harmonize and standardize methodologies comes the critical need for status and performance monitoring so that we can address any gaps in measurements relative to policy goals and targets or the implemented changes on a whole plastic life cycle scale. So last but not least, we have coordination of EO activities, which increases the readiness level in streaming of the collected data and also enabling their exploitation for other applications in line with the FAIR principles. So making sure that the data are findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. Goose has experience with such data management approaches, which can be reconciled with the functioning of national oceanographic data centers, and which at the same time supports also countries that do not perhaps have national data management centers, and where researchers submit their data to different databases in an often uncoordinated manner, or oftentimes don't receive any guidance on how to do it at all. Maybe to illustrate the implementation of these FAIR principles on Goose, there's on this slide a diagram showing a proposed structure of a global data assembly center for marine biogeochemistry, BGC-GDAC as we call it in short. So this concept facilitates partnerships between the global and national structures. The need for both operational and delayed mode availability and quality control of data is another incentive for bridging the gap between services and academics. And I just want to note that this approach could in fact be in line with at least the ocean component of data collection and integration envisioned in the global platform for marine litter monitoring and informing action. Goose has some well-established operational links with relevant observing networks, such as the volunteer observing ships, data networks, such as EMODNet Chemistry, who already hold a lot of the data on marine pollution, at least in Europe, or regional integrated networks, such as US IOS in North America, Eurogoose in Europe, or IMOS in Australia, which all have adopted the system design principles of the framework for ocean observing system. Distribution of marine litter, just like that of nutrients and oxygen, is transboundary in nature. So as we aim to monitor and assess impacts of marine litter across the open ocean, coastal, inshore continuum, I think it will be important to try and reconcile and integrate the two global observing frameworks. I suggest that the vision for an integrated marine debris observing system, IMDOS, could present a unique opportunity to reconcile these frameworks, at least at the level of coordination of ocean observations, which would encompass dedicated marine litter monitoring, but also opportunistic sampling on Goose coordinated networks and remote sensing observations. So I think a successful implementation of IMDOS would benefit from such a transboundary look at the requirements, coordination of observations and data streaming. And as a last comment for the day, I would just like to say that issues of marine litter bring together an unprecedented amount of actors who are willing to engage, sponsor, and coordinate actions that could have a significant collective impact on the status of marine litter monitoring and informing action. However, no matter what resources are available, no single organization or program can probably coordinate all the actions to meet the demands of the society. So it seems that we who participate in this workshop and the organizations we represent are well suited to meet these 5 conditions of collective impact as described in another OceanOps 19 white paper by Rob Weller et al. In this paper, they provide 5 conditions for a successful system of sustained ocean observations generating collective impact: having a common agenda, ensuring consistent measurements, conducting mutually reinforcing activities with continuous and open communication. However, they also note that this requires some dedicated backbone support for the entire initiative. So as a discussion point that maybe we could elaborate more on Wednesday, I'd like to just throw it out there that perhaps implementing the vision for IMDOS could provide such a backbone system. So thank you.
Many thanks, Artur. Then we'll take a few questions now. We have from Thais Fonseca. What is the current state of the establishment / implementation of requirements in other fields than remote sensing?
Yes, so from my perspective, I can probably note that the best knowledge on these requirements would be found in the GASAMP guidelines and the methodology process that UNEP has so far conducted. So this is sort of my state of knowledge, and as we try and implement the vision for the EOV, we would try to bring together information from these processes, as well as scientific literature that maybe indicates at some more requirements that would be specific for open ocean in situ observations, maybe to facilitate evaluation and informing of the global models that are currently used to address the global indicator. Maybe somebody else would like to jump in and add something here.
Doesn't seem okay.
Do not hesitate. The session is supposed to give a large part to discussion. So discussion by chat is nice, but discussion using the mic is nice as well.
Okay, but if there's no further questions, maybe we can jump to Sanaya's presentation.
There is one more question from
Yes.
Christoph Weiss. And do we not do the same for in situ observation in the IMDOS proposition? I believe it's referring to one of your slides, but I can't say which one exactly. Christoph, any clarification?
Yes, it was referring to the slide with the mention to the remote sensing effort. Basically, I think that we do the same with the IMDOS, but it was mentioned after. So it was a question too early.
Okay, thank you, Christoph.
Okay, thanks very much.
Okay, so I'll give the floor to Sanaya.
Okay, so hello everyone. I'm Sanaya Chiba from Marine Plastic Research Group of Johnstick, and I'm a member of the Goose Biology Ecosystem Panel. And so let me share my presentation here. Can you hear my can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. So in my short talk, I would like to show how goose EOVs can be useful for development of the indicators of SDG and conventional biological diversity CBD, and also want to stress the importance in strengthening the coordination between the UNEP and goose communities to streamline the process linking EOVs and the indicator to maximize the ocean data value chain. Okay, so this is a framework of the ocean observing. So in the past decade, the goose panels have identified EOBs to measure in the global scale, and as Arthur already explained, and then goose panels been coordinating observation programs and promoting data sharing. There has been a successful feedback to the society for example, in the area of natural hazard warning system, but still, there's a gap, huge gap remain here in the process of deliver useful ocean information to policy and society. And developing the indicators from EOVs is one way to effectively pass ocean data to policy. So of course, EOVs and the indicators are different, but in the ocean observing community, I have noticed that EOVs are often mixed up with indicators. So this paper nicely clarifies the difference between EOVs and the indicators using the analogy of with the stock market index. So the EOVs are basically the variables written in technical terms. Then the indicators can be developed from often multiple EOVs and translated in more understandable languages. So good indicators for the specific forces should be scientifically credible, of course, but easy to understand. It should be easy to understand for non-scientists. But ironically, the process of development of the offshore indicator for the high-level international initiatives such as SDGs and also CBD IT targets is highly political and honestly complicated for scientists to understand. So for me, it seemed to me there is a high wall between the ocean science community and the experts who develop the indicators. So let me talk about my experience when I had an opportunity to work at the UNEP World Conservation Monitoring Center. And I am a biological oceanographer and goose relatives. So I'm familiar with goose methodology and UVs. But there, when I was there, I came to know the biological indicator partnership program. So that time, and this BIP was working for filling the gap of missing specific indicators for the arch target. So then I was struck for the fact that arch targets and its indicators were dominated by terrestrial components, and marine components was very underrepresented. So the BIP report said there were not enough marine data or no data provider or the partner existing. But I guess that this is more or less counterintuitive for oceanographers, because we know we are actively conducting global observation and have some good observation network and data depository systems. At least we could have provided scientifically credible data with good temporal and spatial resolution to develop some environmental pressure indicators such as pollution and ecosystem state indicators such as marine habitat health. Then also my colleagues and I tried to propose to BIP the new marine ecosystem indicator to fill the indicator gap for the target 10 for vulnerable pressures on vulnerable ecosystem using goose zooplankton EOB scheme. Our proposal was not accepted, unfortunately, but we understood that marine data were actually very strong or has good potential against the data criteria for CBD indicator development. And this is another example. It's a specific missing indicator for ocean acidification impact. Also, there is a global observation network for ocean acidification, but there is no opportunity for them to consider arch target because there is little communication between the two communities. So that traditionally, there has been not enough communication between, communication between oceanographer community and high-level conservation policy initiatives. And there was a structure and or organizational gap between them. But as you know, then with the launch of the UN Decade of the Ocean Science in the next year, the gap is going to be filled bit by bit. For example, some proposed SDG 14 indicators, such as for the ocean acidification and eutrophication, will be developed, I believe, I hope, in close collaboration with UNEP and IOC GOOS. So, of course, the better communication can reduce the structural redundancy, which hinders the effective use of limited resources. So in case of global marine biodiversity monitoring, two similar concepts have been evolved in parallel, but independently in the Goose Biology Ecology Panel and the Marine Biodiversity Thematic Group of the GeoBond. So there are redundancy and confusion over planning, the personnel and resources used among the community, among these two communities, but these two parties have teaming up a couple of years ago and are now working together in coordinating existing programs and implementing EOBs to develop to deliver the indicators. So this may be the example of the lesson we learned for the marine debris community. Then now, finally, they're talking about marine debris. It's no need to say that marine debris pollution is transboundary, so global. Then, so we need to monitor them in a globally integrated manner. So the integrated marine debris observing system IMDOS is the idea that was proposed at the Ocean of the 19 last year to coordinate existing number of monitoring and data sharing programs in a global scale. So IMDOSCOPE is a framework to recap, IMDOSCOPE is a framework to support the international community to implement marine debris EOBs, which could provide with supplementary good data of the global indicator for SDG and CBD. So implementation of global EOBs and the development of the indicator of the high-level international convention should be done through normally through years of examination, discussion, and effort. But the nature of the marine debris pollution demands us an urgent and stringent solution. So we should do it right now. So we have, but luckily we have many good cars already. The public and policy awareness is very high. The some resources are offered. The harmonization and methodology is already in progress. And rapid progress in the scientific knowledge and technological innovation also seen. So we cannot lose this timing and momentum. So through the Wednesday session, and we would like to discuss how we can establish best practices to streamline the process linking EOBs and the indicators for marine debris. And what is the role of the IMDOS as a framework in integrating existing various efforts? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sanae. So I think we see a few questions here in the chat. I'll read some, and then I think Gillian also wanted to take the floor. One question is from Toste Tanwa. The Ocean Coordination Group of GOOS is focused on platform-based networks, floats, ships, etc. But IMDOS is based on a theme, plastics or EOB. Another observing thematic network that has been successful in Goa is Goa On, the network for ocean acidification. Can IMDOS learn from Goa On?
Yes, exactly. And we talked about the Goa On things with Arthur the other day. Then, so when we're talking about, if thinking about the nature of the societal and the political demand for solution of marine debris marine debris problems, we have to hurry up, and we cannot take. Unfortunately, we cannot take a long time for long time to establish the the global ocean observing network, just like other GOOS initiatives. So I think GoOn is a very good example of that we have a lot of things to learn from GoOn.
Great, thank you. I think Gillian, perhaps you would like to take the floor to do your clarification, if
thank you.
You can right now.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, the IACHI targets are actually expiring this year. And so currently the Convention on Biological Diversity is developing the post-2020 global biodiversity goals and targets. It will be different than the previous structure. So one thing that will be different is that we are trying to align much closer with the chemicals conventions. And another thing that will be different, well, there's quite a lot of things that will be different. In terms of the way that the monitoring framework was developed in the past, which is what Sinai showed, the Biodiversity Indicators Partnership, which is a group of partners, really drove the development of the monitoring framework, and the monitoring framework was separate from the actual IACHI framework. It was not adopted by the parties, by the countries themselves for monitoring. And what we are doing with the new framework, which is being developed now, is that the monitoring framework will be officially part of the framework for the convention, and it will be adopted at the COP. And so this will really sort of escalate the importance of monitoring in the Biodiversity Convention. And an additional thing that is being done is the nationalization of indicators. So we'll have a set of headline indicators which are going to be recommended for countries. So it's really taking a sort of advantage of the experiences in SDGs to try to get countries involved in reporting more and more data, and to have more national ownership as opposed to only having sort of partners involved in reporting. And so if you look on the CBD website, there was a draft monitoring framework that was just out for peer review in August. Now that's closed, but we will have a new monitoring framework that is developed and released in the next, it should be out by the end of October, prior to the online SAPSTA meeting. Thanks.
Thank you, Julian, for clarification. Actually, I took a look of that draft, and because we share that information among the Goose Biology Ecosystem Panel, and we knew the next in the post 2020 CBD plan, they consider the lots of the marine ecosystem. So that is a very good news for the Goose Biology Ecosystem Panel to, to contribute to the development of CBD indicator. So thank you very much.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. We have one more question here, Sanay. Does the public awareness include the citizen science, like, for example, beach cleanup or collecting of litter from beaches?
Yes, of course, included. And also, I personally would like to say that the collaboration of it's not only the marine debris observation, but the collaboration with the sailing community is a huge potential, not only for the collecting the global data, but also for promoting the literacy, the ocean literacy.
Thank you. I'm picking up another question here from earlier, actually from Sanay to Gillian, and it's related to the subglobal indicators that are using models. On the presentation there, I think of the ERICS model, what we're calling the plastic flow model. That what model shows is particle movement on ocean circulation models, so actual observation data. Would that be needed for validation then? And Gillian, over to you.
Sorry, it took me a minute to turn my mic on. I think that we can absolutely use different sources of information for validation. I mean, this is something that we already started doing, as you know, Heidi, because of the fact that the GEMBEC et al. Presents sort of just broad estimates of litter, and it doesn't really give you a clear idea on how much is escaping into the oceans. There's some assumptions that are being made, and so one of the things that we did to validate the model is there's an effort to do brand audits of different of what's found on the beaches. And so the idea is when you find something, then you try to source where it would be from. And so there was an effort to do a brand audit in South Africa and in Kenya by someone who was working, sort of collaborating with us. And we sent that data to the person at FSU who was doing the model, and they did use that to try to see if the information from the brand audit on where things were coming from was the same as what we were finding in the model, and the two aligned really well. I mean, this is only 2 countries. It's certainly not enough for us to completely validate the model, but it is a starting point. And I did see the comment on the total current, but I'm not an expert. Maybe Heidi can comment on this. I'm not sure what this means. I mean, we do have, of course, lots of oceanographic models that estimate particle movement. So that's what we're using. So I'm not sure if Christoph wants to elaborate, or if Heidi understood what was being said there.
Well, I'm actually thinking that maybe we should think about checking if we could engage Eric in one of the sessions later this week and find a bit of time, maybe.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea because he's really an expert.
Yeah, I think so. We're working with Florida State University from UNEP side to develop that model. So that might be a good way forward, I think. There are also questions here from Toste on what would the next steps be towards an improved global coordination of marine plastic observing and delivery of information? we see some good and some not so good examples from the ocean observing community. So I think that's a question to all the speakers. Who would like to start? Gillian, you're on the screen, but anyone could start.
Yeah, this is a.
Yeah. Okay. I'm happy to start. I mean, I think Heidi, also, you're in a good position to talk about this, even though you're, sort of chairing the meeting. I really do think that the UN Environment Assembly has a role here. There has been the establishment of this ad hoc and open-ended expert group on marine litter and microplastics. And one of the mandates of this group is to coordinate the issue of marine plastics. And I think that the group has been successful in this, and at least in terms of bringing a lot of the government partners on board, but there's heaps and heaps of other stakeholders that are involved also. And as I mentioned in my presentation, that group is also already working on indicators, not only indicators in terms of what, actually just plastic density, but trying to take a life cycle approach to marine plastics and coordinate across the whole thing. And so I think that, we can build upon that and some of the other networks that exist. Obviously, in terms of basic data collection, you do have the Goose, which has been involved in this for a long time, and the GeoBond. So I think that we are in a good position to really take this coordination forward.
Thank you, Saneh. Any additions or input?
No, I just wanted to say, the answer to the Toaster's question is that should be the outcome of this workshop through the 1 week, the working group of those for the 1 week, through the 1 week workshop.
Yes, excellent point. Arthur?
Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe I'll also answer with another question. To what extent are there perhaps gaps in the SDG indicator that could be filled out by the more opportunistic sampling? I'm thinking, for example, about microplastics. Microplastics in the water column in the open ocean could constitute a substantial amount of the total plastics budget. So, and if that's not currently considered in the SDG framework, maybe there's space for more coordinated input from the ship-based or maybe in the future also autonomous platforms to contribute to that. So maybe that's a question that we could use to build some new initiatives to address such a gap in the budget.
I think that's an excellent point, and I think it goes back also to what Gillian was mentioning in her presentation in the beginning. She mentioned that at UNEP we have been requested to map out and develop indicators to harmonize monitoring and so on. And this, we see them as these are indicators that would go beyond the SDG one. So they could be related to impact, they could be related to microplastics. So it would be great if we, throughout this week and the upcoming sessions, also keep thinking about what kind of indicators would be the most useful to focus on, perhaps in the context of this discussion. Then in terms of what next steps are, the aim of this week, or not the only aim, but some of the hopes that we have from UNEP side is to take this community white paper that we have been working on with the GeoBlue Planet and many really valuable input from many experts in this community, and see how do you operationalize this. So this is a bit of an outline of what the current state of operations are and what are opportunities going forward. But how do we break that into something that's maybe in short, what are next steps in short term, medium term, long term, and how does that link to other initiatives with, for example, the decade of ocean science, of course, being a very key one. So I wanted to check, well, there is also some input here from Christoph. Quickly, the ocean currents used by Eric and others like myself are coming from OGCM based on physics laws, but they do not include physical processes. That could be important for the dispersion of any materials in the oceans like tides, waves, etc. Do we have additional questions? And I think feel free to also take the floor at this point. If someone has.
Can I ask you to the last comment?
Yes.
What kind of priority we have to make between micro and macro plastics? I'm not sure I understand the point.
It might be not, yeah, go ahead.
I think that the issue between micro and macroplastics is that there's different sampling techniques involved. I mean, in terms of, for our discussion here. And so even in terms of beach litter, we are pretty good at macroplastics because this is things that we can see, we can collect, we can, you know, we can quantify. Whereas to look at microplastics, you're using different sampling techniques and different technologies. And those are less used and less well developed. And so therefore we just don't have as much knowledge on microplastics. And so I think that this was the focus is, you know, if we're talking about knowledge gaps, then there is this knowledge gap on microplastics, where for macroplastics, there's also knowledge gaps for sure, but the methodologies are more used and more developed.
Okay,
Thank you. And to add to that, I think it's also very much a difference between regions, where microplastics monitoring might be quite developed in some regions and not very much at the focus of the attention yet in some other regions. I see another question here regarding indicators from Stephanie Liefman to everyone. More and more studies show microplastics in the gut content of fish and benthic animals. How could this be included as an indicator of ecosystem health, and how feasible and robust can it be? Maybe Gillian?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that we were originally proposing, was to include indicators related to entanglement and also ingestion of both macro and microplastics. There's a few issues here in terms of actually developing this as an indicator that we've been struggling with. And you can see these in the example also. And one of the issues that we have is in terms of actually using this as a global indicator. Certainly it should be national indicators, but as a global indicator, we do have some issue in terms of comparability, because we would need to identify a set of species that would give us some comparability across different places. And so are we looking at sort of just coastal fish? Are we asking countries to select which coastal fish they want to look at? How do we then compare one type to another? Because different fish are likely to retain plastics in different ways, probably. And the same with birds. And in terms of, if we're looking at migratory birds, we also lose information on perhaps where the plastic actually came from, because and with fish too, you know, with migratory species where it's a little unclear where it came from if you're trying to identify that. And so basically it is definitely an important issue, and it should be included as an indicator of ecosystem health. Particularly this would be important for, you know, for the biodiversity indicators that we were talking about. But there are still knowledge gaps that I think we need to fill in terms of how we could roll this out. And hopefully that would give us something that we could do. The other issue, of course, is that, you know, we don't really want to propose killing animals and gutting them in order to sample. And so the sampling would be biased by the fish that we were able to sample.
Thanks, Gillian. Arthur, Sane, any additional input?
So, you know, as long as you know, through this discussion and presentation, and also as long as the reading the white paper, Emily's white paper, my honest feeling is there are still lots of gaps between you know, between the two community, UNEP and the Goose. And for example, in Emily's paper, white paper, the criteria for the readiness about the variable to measure is probably quite different from what the oceanographer thinks. So we still need need to have a long discussion to get in closer for this 1 week. I hope so.
Great, thank you. Arthur?
So yeah, I think I don't have any more comments, but I'll just like to note that we only have another 7 or 8 minutes before the start of the next session, and I think it would be a good idea to give an opportunity for a break for those who would like. We will start with Francois and Alex at 2:15. So maybe it's okay if we keep on discussing, but those who would like to take a break, then that would be a good idea. So that's just a logistics note from me.
No, that's excellent. Thank you for that. I just wanted to point here that there are some comments here in the suggestions in the chat from Alex Tura that microplastics could be included in the Muscle Watch program, for example, and then supporting comment from Amy Lasher in support of Alex's comments. We have shown mussels of different but closely related species can be used on national regional study already, and the methods are easier than fish, for example. So that's interesting and promising. But yes, as you mentioned, it might be an opportunity to take a bit of a break before the next session. I think if many of those that are on this session will attend, hopefully, all the other sessions that we're organizing on the marine litter topic, could everyone think about what indicators would be of use and give it some thought over the next day or two, so that when we come back and continue these discussions, maybe we can have a bit more sharing and time to ponder upon what these relevant indicators could be. So thank you very much from my side. Handing back to Arthur.